Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Well, a lot of good news, relatively speaking, over the last several days in terms of the recovery from the lockdown periods. And boy, as more information comes out on the science, as we've been mentioning all morning, the World Health Organization announcing that the transmission from asymptomatic COVID-19 infected individuals is very rare, undermining the argument for continued lockdowns. Frankly, undermining the argument for lots of things, including masks and social distancing, much less playgrounds that are shuttered and pools that are closed and the like.
So stupid. I mean, they canceled summer in Illinois.
But we've done what we've done, and now we need to climb back from the damage that's been inflicted best we can.
Yeah, the guest we had on said they say the sky's falling, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to walk it back. Yeah, you can walk it back, but you need a brave politician to do that. And where is one of those in Illinois?
Well, I'm thinking more globally than Illinois, and so what we saw is still just a befuddling number in terms of the May jobs report, 2.5 million jobs to the plus, as opposed to the 7 to 9 million jobs lost that was projected. And then, of course, the market reaction over the last several days into today to the positive as well. I mean, you have just still a relatively small fraction of the economy up and running, particularly in big blue states, and yet we're not that far off from the highs pre-pandemic, all things considered. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined by Christopher Whalen, investment banker and chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, LLC, author of Forward Men, From Inspiration to Enterprise, and Inflated, How Money and Debt Built the American Dream. Boy, that last title couldn't be more appropriate for a discussion here. Christopher Whalen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know about the I don't know about inflation, but in terms of inflated with Fed facilities being set up and fiscal quote unquote stimuli, I don't know how much more inflated we can possibly get, Christopher.
Well, that's true. We have both inflation and deflation at the same time. It is possible. And the central banks make things worse by trying to help. You'll notice the huge swings in prices that we see now in markets. That's not normal. That's because the central banks are creating all of this credit, pushing it into the markets, and whoosh, they go back up. But there's no connection between, say, this quarter's earnings and what you see in stocks. You got to keep that in mind. This is pure momentum.
Well, but it seems to me, I mean, a lot of people have argued, get your take on it, that what you have is Jerome Powell saying, we are going to protect the investor class. You can have confidence. We've got $7 trillion in liquidity, and I haven't even come close to deploying all the tools that I have on my disposal, and we have the tools to make sure that we smooth out the in-between from the lockdown to a fully operational American economy.
Well, look, I think Powell is doing what he's supposed to do. You know, he's trying to protect the financial infrastructure, the payments, and everything else. But that's not where the problem is this time. That was 2008. This time we have destroyed the livelihoods of lots of working people. And these are not people who own homes necessarily or have big credit profiles that you're going to read about in the Wall Street Journal. These are just normal business people that we've destroyed because of the lockdown and everything else you were just discussing. So, you know, it's a very different situation. It's closer to the 1930s in terms of the dislocation of people. But the institutions are okay. I will say, though, that the banks don't have a problem today, but investors do. Bond investors, REITs, which buy real estate, they buy buildings. You got Sam Zell there in Chicago. These guys are in a bad way because an asset class that a year ago was considered, you know, premium blue chip is now in the dumper. Think about airplanes. Think about ships. All of these assets that were insured and maintained and thought to be really investment grade kind of things, they're now turned upside down. Yeah. So the world has got some serious issues to work through. And as you said, the WHO has just confirmed that we made a terrible mistake with the lockdown. And there is nobody in New York, I'll tell you that that wants to have that conversation this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
Because you guys are
You
just
know?
starting to open up.
Remember the hospital ship?
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
the
Comfort,
the
the West
hospital in Central Park that I ride by every morning when I get out on my bike? Uh-uh.
Yeah,
None
well,
of that was
we had
necessary.
McCormick Place here, and when they were
Yep.
building that out, 3,000 beds, I thought, what models are they looking at? And this cannot be right. And we were right; it cannot be right. And they dismantled and took them down. I want to ask you about because I know a lot of people. We reopened Illinois late May, so a lot of people are getting services done, nails and hair. The woman who does my hair, she made more during this time, unemployed, not working. She made $2,100 a month after taxes. And so
That's right.
she's like, why would I even come back to work? But I just did because I missed seeing people and I missed doing my job.
Well, a lot of small businesses chose to keep their people's health care intact and then put them on unemployment because, workers in a restaurant, things of that nature, it was a raise. And so that was the right thing to do instead of going through all this government, nonsense in terms of loans and everything else. We're not going to make loans to small businesses. It's just not. You might as well give them a grant. There's no point in underwriting that loan because it's got a 50% probability of default. That's small business. That's the way small businesses are. They fail in droves every year. So, this whole thing is tragic. Just speaking as a person who works in the financial markets, it was unnecessary. And it just shows you we're all held hostage by various agents and experts, and they're all conflicted, and they're all corrupt. I don't care whether you talk about healthcare or finance or anything else, they all have an agenda. And that's what you always have to ask first is, what is this person's agenda?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. She made $4,200 a month.
What's the incentives? Yeah, the incentives that they're facing, and then that people will respond to the incentives in the same way that you would likely if you were presented with the same incentives.
Well,
and
we're
that's
all
what they did.
human.
That's right.
We're all human, right?
So year over year in May, we saw a 48% increase in Chapter 11 filings. And so, we're far from out of the woods with respect to the economy recovering, even if the stock market has in the short term. And I wonder what your handle is on when you think we'll know just what how low the depths will be. Will it be by the first week of July after we've seen what June brings with respect to the phased-in reopenings?
Well, June is a month for tax payments in most cities. That's mostly a quarterly exercise. So whether you're talking about individuals or businesses or landlords, those payments are down dramatically. The Fed can help by lending money to municipalities short term, but the long-term hit that they're going to take in terms of revenue, sales taxes from hospitality and entertainment and all that. Look at New York. The entire entertainment industry is closed. And until we get rid of this nonsense with the masks and the social distancing, which clearly was not necessary, this part of the economy is on hold, and these institutions will fail. We're a big supporter of American Ballet Theater, 100 years old, one of the great companies in the world. They may fail simply because they can't work. Mm-hmm. Society is based upon density. New York was built by Dutch people to pack as many people in as you could because they wanted to do business. Shorto's great book about New York tells you this story, and yet, here we are with all this infrastructure, and we're talking about working at home permanently.
Well, that's that you should have known that was you should have known that was coming because of the Dutch. I mean, at first it was tulip mania in the 1600s, and now fast forward 400 years, and you have COVID-19 mania.
No, the Dutch were smart enough to sell New York to the British.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Fair enough.
And they stayed here and did business, and they said, here, you take care of it.
I want to go back to what you mentioned before with respect to real estate investment trusts and how much of a bloodletting you think is going to occur in commercial real estate. Because, of course, that is a huge sector in big, urban, dense cities like New York and Chicago and L.A.
We don't really have good comparisons. The last time we had a problem in commercial real estate was the early and mid-1990s. And that came about because of a lot of lending. It was connected with the oil bust in Texas in the late 70s. We have an oil bust today in shale. So all the communities where you saw building and hotels and short-term housing for workers, that's all stopped. That's come to a complete halt, and you think about the valuation for those properties, it's obviously fallen. With the big cities, you have a different problem, which is office space and rental apartments and all of this, which have been depopulated. People have just left. I mean, New York is empty. I ride my bike around the city, and aside from the fact that everything's boarded up, we also just don't have the kids. We don't have a lot of the short-term workers who all went home. A lot of the people I know from the arts, they just literally went home to live with mom and dad because they don't have jobs. So the lifeblood of the city is commerce. It's people out doing things, it's tourism, everything else, and that's not going to come back until we really clarify what we need to do and what we don't need to do in terms of the coronavirus.
There was an estimate a few weeks back that Manhattan saw a 25% decrease in its population.
I think that's probably right. There's no street traffic. The automobile traffic's up a bit, but there's nobody on the streets. And, you know, I live on Central Park. We're usually inundated with tourists this time of year. And there are people out there selling them pony rides and beverages and everything else. None of that. So you asked me before about a number. We published something in my blog this week. We tried to size the commercial real estate mess. And my guess is we've got $5 trillion worth of assets tied to commercial real estate in this country. It's about half the size of residential mortgages. And my guess is we could take 10% losses over 5 years. So, you know, that's a lot of money. That's $100 billion a year in write-downs. The other thing you got to think about is that this is not just, you know, the banks are the least of it because the banks hold the best kind of paper in portfolio when it comes to commercial lending, but the REITs and the bond investors. There was a huge surge in issuance in what we call commercial mortgage-backed securities, and those are kind of opaque. Nobody knows about them. You can't find prices in the public domain. You need a Bloomberg terminal, frankly. And I think that, you know, the losses there are going to be kind of quiet. You're not going to see them, but there's going to be hits to employment. There's going to be a lot of hits to investors, you know, insurance companies, pension funds. They all loved investing in buildings. They all loved investing in planes. They thought it was safe. And now we've turned the whole world on its head.
And the way that we're going to backdoor bail out some of those institutions you mentioned is through facilities that the Fed set up.
You can finance them in the short term, but if they don't have tax revenues, they're going to have to cut back on costs. And that means a reduction in services. You guys have already been living through that in Chicago. You're going to see more because the federal government can't make this better. They can give you financing, but the Fed is not in the business of grants, and they're not in the business of restructuring. That takes us back to the 1930s, to the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which I think is something a lot of politicians ought to refresh their understanding of, because that's what you need.
Well, that's actually,
insolvency.
George Mason law professor Tom Vatanian argues for exactly that.
Oh, yeah. No, Tom is a good friend. He's right on target, and he knows the history. See, in the 30s, you had two buckets, and I'll just talk about banks briefly. You had banks that could make it. They went to the FDIC. They got insurance, and they went through a process, and when they came out, they were okay. Everybody else went to Jesse Jones and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and they restructured them. They literally tore them apart, put them back together, sold assets, did everything they had to do. And the interesting thing is it worked. It bought time. And this is what really troubles me about today is that the whipsaw that we see from all the central bank action trying to help is actually causing more damage than you need. Because look at where stocks were 2 months ago. Look at where they are now. What's the valuation given the volatility we see? Who knows? Why on earth do we have fair value accounting if we're going to get whipsawed this way every year or two? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help me as an analyst understand what's going on, right? So I think that we live in a time when we've got a lot going on and less time, a lot more volatility. And so you got to feel for our public officials, because what are they supposed to do? They get hit with this stuff and they got to make a decision. They were told to lock down. Well, that was wrong. You know, we followed the communist Chinese as our example. That's great. You know, we could spend all morning on this.
No, we did. It went around the globe. We did exactly what the Chinese did.
That's the definitive line on it right there. We followed the Chinese communists. That makes a lot of sense. Christopher Whalen, he's an investment banker and chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, LLC, author of Ford Men, From Inspiration to Enterprise, and Inflated, How Money and Debt Built the American Dream. He's also editor for the Institutional Risk Analyst. Christopher Whalen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
Yeah, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.